Intangible assets. They're different from the property, plant, and equipment. They don't have physical substance. A truck, you can, crash into it. You know you did something. But these don't have that physical substance. They also are not what you would call financial assets. That would be things like accounts receivable and investments. Intangible assets are rights and privileges, things like patents, trade names, the copyrights, franchises. They give you the right to produce something or to work in a certain territory or to use some process. And then goodwill is also an intangible asset, and that's a little more, they call it amorphous. It's just tools that just can't be bought and sold. So maybe your company has a lot of process knowledge, a highly skilled workforce, and so it can be much more creative and cost efficient than a similar company down the street. These intangibles, they're a little different than our physical assets in a couple of ways. First of all, everybody can use them at once. Not everybody can sit at a desk or drive a truck at once. And the more you use them, the more value they have, really. And unlike a truck, the more you use it, the more it's going to be wearing out. These, the more you use them, the better they are. So a lot of times the intangible assets are one of the most valuable assets that a company has. So if you look at the reported net assets of a company like Microsoft, and I have that in my notes, the numbers there. If you look at their assets minus their liabilities, that gives you their net assets at the book value. And so if you compare that to how much the market values the company, the difference there is going to be what you would call goodwill. And that's an intangible asset. So the market capitalization, that's the number of shares outstanding times the market value of the share, that gives the value of the company to the market. And if that's a lot more than the net assets, it would be the goodwill that would account for that. Okay, so how we set these up, there's a couple of different things to consider. For the initial cost, we only record these if they are purchased. Okay, in other words, if we buy a patent, we buy a trade name, we buy a copyright, we buy a franchise, we enter a franchise agreement, it comes on at the cost that we paid for it. That's only if we buy it. If we develop it internally, in other words, we do a lot of research and development, say for a patent, we do all the research and development and we finally come up with a patent, and then we take it to the patent office, the US Patent Office, to get it registered. We cannot include any of the research and development in the cost of that patent. All of the research and development gets expensed. The only costs that we could include in the cost of the patent, which we would bring on as an asset, would be the registration costs and any legal costs of obtaining that patent. And that would be the same for the trade name, copyright, franchises. So you have to distinguish if it is internally developed. A lot of the costs will be regarded as research and development expense. If you buy a patent, you can bring it on as an asset at whatever you paid for it. The other thing you have to think about with intangibles is, does it have a limited life or an unlimited life? If it has a limited life, we're going to amortize it. Okay, that's like with our plant assets, we have depreciation. With our natural resources, we have depletion. And with our intangible assets, we have amortization. And we only amortize if it has a legal life. So a patent has a legal life of 20 years, or its useful life, whichever is less. So we would amortize it over, which one of those applied. The copyright, the useful life, is usually going to be the useful life is going to be usually what you go to, because it'll be less than the author's life plus 70 years. Franchises, you amortize over the duration of the contract. And trade names and trademarks, they have indefinite lives, goodwill, indefinite. They just get checked each year to see if they still have the same value, but they do not get amortized. So those are the things that you have to look at with your intangibles. I think my notes pretty well tell a little bit about each one, the patents, copyrights, and so I'm going to leave you to look at that on your own. Very important, research and development, always an expense. I'm going to do a separate podcast on goodwill, because that one operates a little bit differently from the others.